welcome to our discussion on Latin American revolutions. This is continuing chapter 21 in our AIMSCO books, and we are still in period 5 in AP World. All right. Let's see if this works. Okay, so when we're looking at revolutions and we're kind of continuing the trend, with each of them, you want to understand the long-term causes. So what has been going on for quite a while that caused people to want to have a revolution, and then what are the short-term or immediate causes? What's something that happened, an immediate event? What's kind of the spark that lit the fire? What was the straw that broke the camel's back? What is it that immediately caused it? And then we want to look at what are the long-term global effects. So whether you know the specific ins and outs of each revolution, that's helpful. But because we're in a survey world history course, we're really looking at, can you understand the big picture, and can you support that big picture idea with some specific details? All right, there's a lot of information in this PowerPoint that you need to sort of be aware of. Here we go. I just like to start with a quote with Bob Marley. All right. So in general, when we look at Latin American revolutions, we want to look at the causes, the effects, the leaders. So general causes, problems within the Spanish Empire itself, whether it be they have problems with Napoleon later on, and you have monarchy disposed, whether it be problems there on the ground within the colonies themselves between the different social castes, the different social strata, that represents any problems within the Spanish Empire. So problems that are going on internally, problems that are going on externally. Then you have the Enlightenment, which are the ideas that we've talked about quite a lot, where the philosophers are really bringing up ideas and concepts about government and the function of government and the idea of who should rule, who the power belongs to. Those really changing ideas that influence both the American and the French Revolution. And the American and the French Revolutions and their successes are both impacting the revolutions that will, all the revolutions that will come after them. Because once people see this idea has been successful, then it gives them the confidence to believe that they also could make a success. So problems within the Spanish Empire itself. Political disempowerment. So what the Spanish colonies did was the Spanish colonies would send people from Spain to the individual Spanish colonies in order to run the colony itself. So the people running the colonies, often known as peninsulares, were at the top of the social strata. They were usually not people born of the colonies themselves. They were always people that were born in Europe and then came over to rule. The Spanish colonies are run by something called the Council of the Indies, and the group appointed by the king, they met in Spain, and then after they meet in Spain, then they tell the people in the colonies what to do, and then the viceroys are the people that actually, the peninsulares that actually carry out the officials' business in Spain. Well, as you can imagine, the people that are actually living in the Spanish colonies feel that the Spanish crown itself is really out of touch with what's going on and what needs to be done, because the Spanish crown isn't there. They're thousands of miles away. They're across the ocean. They're weeks or months, depending on where you're living, to get to a Spanish colony in order to lay down the law. And the same thing that we saw with the American Revolution, that distance between the mother country and the colonies themselves really ends up causing a lot of problems. It's kind of hard to enforce rules. It's also hard for people that are living in the colonies to make sure that the crown understands what it is that the problems are. And so that distance really causes this political disempowerment, particularly the group known as the Creoles. And the Creoles are the group of, you are European, but, so I'm going to attempt to write the word Creole, and it's not going to work here, but, so you're Creoles. All right, so you have the Creoles, and they are someone that is born in the colonies, but their parents are of European ancestry, it's probably Spanish. And they're the ones that feel like while they have education and while they're often wealthy, they don't have political rights, and they feel like they should get political rights. They begin more and more to view themselves as whatever colony they're in. So I'm Mexican, I'm South American, any of the ones that come out of South America, but they still view themselves as having the rights of a Spanish person. Just like in the American colonies, the American colonists began to see themselves as North Carolinian or Georgian or a Massachusetts person, but they still believed they should have the rights of the British. So economic disempowerment. The Spanish had the first right to control colonial goods and resources because they're following that theory of mercantilism. That theory of mercantilism that's really the reason for setting up colonies. Your colony, the purpose of your colony is to give you raw materials and then to be a source of buyers for products made from the raw materials. Well, a lot of the colonies feel like that's not how they see themselves, and they want to have more of a say-so in their economic rights and the role that they play in the Spanish economy. And the Spanish crown's like, listen, the whole reason we have you is to benefit the Spanish crown. We're not really concerned with your individual economic success. As long as that benefits the Spanish crown, we're down with what's going on. All right, so this is looking at, this is looking at the social caste that we talked about before when we looked at the Spanish colonies. So you have the Peninsulares on top. These are your native Spaniards. They are the ones that are in control. They are the ones that have all the political rights within the Spanish colonies. They are the ones that are acting as the viceroys, those people carrying out the duties assigned to them by the Spanish crown. The Creoles, already mentioned before, they are highly educated, they are wealthy, but they lack political rights. Your mestizos are someone that is born with Native American and European blood. Typically, that is a person where the mother is Native American Indian and the father is of European blood. You're seeing this coming off the encomienda plantations or other plantations itself. A mulatto is someone who has African and European blood. You are below the Creoles. You have some rank, but really not that much. And then you have your Indian slaves and your African slaves at the very, very bottom. So there is disagreement about the spread of rights within this social hierarchy that's going to cause problems. And really coming out of the Creoles who want to continue to be on top of everybody else, but also they want to have the same political rights that the Peninsulares have. The Enlightenment, we've mentioned this before. Oh, I'm so sorry. Before the kings are placed on the throne by God, and only God can remove them. That's the idea of divine right to rule, right? The church is having a lot of influence. But then after the Enlightenment, these ideas that aren't just being kept in Europe. What you have with these revolutions is that the Enlightenment ideals that spark them are causing the Enlightenment to be spread. Now that we have an Atlantic trade system or a global trade system, you don't have things happening in isolation anymore, or if so, it's very rare. Ideas are spreading. They're spreading rapidly. And ideas can be dangerous depending on how you're looking at it. They can be glorious, but that's what sparks the revolution, right? It's that idea that you deserve more than what you have. And so the Enlightenment saying that the government is based on a contract between the ruler and the ruled, that's social contract theory. The idea of the government exists to protect the rights of citizens, your right to life, liberty, and property. So we're looking again at the influences of Hobbes and Locke. That if the government violates those natural rights, that the people have an obligation to overthrow that government and put in somebody in its place that will do the job. So again, this is more influence of Locke looking at his two treatises on government. So the American, I am sorry, that's really loud. I can't get the volume to go down. All right. So the success of the American Revolution showed others that colonies could succeed in overthrowing a much more powerful mother country. If the American Revolution had been a failure, the revolutions probably kind of would have stopped them because it just would have confirmed that there's no way that you can win. So thank goodness for France coming in to aid the American colonies. Now the French crown probably regrets that later on when they lose their heads and they have the French Revolution. But the fact that these know-nothings who had no right and no right on paper to beat the power that was Great Britain and succeeded shows to these other colonies it can be done. It's not out of the realm of possibility. The French Revolution. So this is post, we're really looking at, you have the French Revolution, and then you have what you listened to last night dealing with Napoleon. Napoleon crowns himself Emperor of France in 1804. He wants to end an attempt to rule all of Europe. He puts his family and his friends in charge of the territory he's conquered. He's trying to create a French empire, but while he's doing that, he's spreading the concept of Napoleonic Code, which is based on equality and the spread of fair rule and the getting rid of these monarchs. And in so doing it, he puts his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the throne in Spain when he takes over Spain, and the Spanish royal family flees because and they don't want to die. The same things happens in Portugal. This area is known as the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain and Portugal are, and the leaders of Portugal, they flee to Brazil because they don't want to lose their heads because things aren't going well. So Europe's kind of in disarray during this period because the European rulers are trying to figure out what in the heck to do with Napoleon, who seems to really be dead set on taking all of Europe for himself and being fairly successful at it. So this turmoil that's going on in Europe post-French Revolution allows these colonies to set up and have revolutions without entirely being noticed, or being noticed and then having your European colonial power not able to focus all its efforts on you because they're trying to deal with what the heck's going on with France. So there's a lot of things going on. All right, we've talked about the Haitian Revolution, or what starts off as Saint-Domingue overthrowing France. We talked about this earlier separately, so I'm going to go through it kind of quickly here, just as a recap. Technically, when we do the revolutions, you should include the Haitian Revolution as part of the Latin American revolutions. We did it when we looked at, I think, the Enlightenment earlier. All right, so the first of the islands to break away is the western half of what was known as Hispaniola, and that today is the Dominican Republic and Haiti. It was known as Saint Dominique. It was owned by France. It was used for sugar plantations and some coffee plantations. It was heavily based on slave labor. Slavery sucked and was awful no matter where you were, but in Saint Dominique, it was the worst of the worst of the worst. The slave population greatly outnumbered the French population. So the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which is one of the results that comes of the French Revolution, gives the right to vote to all free men, and that includes people of mixed ancestry. Oops. Oh my no. And so powers on the island refused to accept or enforce that law. So you have people that were mixed ancestry, so your mulattoes, and really your mulattoes, not necessarily mestizos, but your people that are mixed ancestry, wanting to rise up and demand that that law be enforced because they are, after all, an extension of France. They are entitled to that right. The people in power are denying them that right, and the main reason they're denying them that right is because they're afraid of what would happen if people got rights. They don't want to end slavery. They don't want to have anything to change from the current power structure that was existing there in Saint Dominique. So there's a pushback there, and then Toussaint Louverture leads a rebellion of slaves and those of mixed ancestry against France. This is just a map showing you Hispaniola, and then this part that is, my mouse just having some struggles. There we go. So Saint Dominique on this half. All right, the results Toussaint becomes the hero of Hispaniola. Eventually, they win. Spain and Britain get involved too. The Napoleon in France is kind of worried, and he's like, well, what if this movement spreads? What if we have other people trying to rise up? I don't want that. And so he sends troops to Saint Dominique, or what will become Haiti, in order to fight that off. Toussaint agrees to a ceasefire. He's captured, he's put in prison, and he dies. The fight for independence then continues, and in 1804 they win, and France gives up the island. A lot of it because Napoleon wants to focus on taking all of Europe, and he decides, heck, I'm not interested in North America at this juncture. I'll go back and take that part over after I finish taking all of Europe and building my French Empire in Europe. I just don't want to deal with it. This is a headache, whatever. Cut my losses, snip, snap, done. And so the rebels end up winning. They rename the island Haiti. What makes this super, super, super unique is that this, of all the revolutions that we're looking at, is a revolution started by enslaved peoples that is extremely successful, and we're not going to see anything else like that. Doesn't mean we won't see other slave rebellions that you'll talk about in U.S. history. It doesn't mean that there weren't other slave rebellions, but remember, there's a difference between a rebellion and a revolution. A revolution is what you create after you rebel and win, and then you start a change in government patterns. And we do not have another very, very successful example of that, of an enslaved population like we have with the Haitian Revolution, and that is its significance. Now, the idea and the success of the Haitian Revolution is going to spread to other areas in Latin America, because if they can do it, heck, let's go for it. So let's look at some background info on the Spanish and Portuguese colony. The biggest Portuguese colony, of course, being Brazil. Spain's owning most of Mexico, Central, and Latin America. So Spain had worked hard to make what they believed were improvements in their colonies and providing an education. I want to be really careful, because education leads to a lot of things. It is very difficult to control a highly educated population, because sometimes in your effort to control, you have to make sure that those that you control are ignorant. I'm not saying stupid. I'm not commenting on their intelligence. Ignorant means that you're not aware of things going on. I don't know that process. I don't know that there's been a revolution. I don't know about the American Revolution. I don't know about the ideas of the Enlightenment. It has nothing to do with your actual intellect level. It has to be what you're exposed to. And when you begin exposing people to all sorts of ideas and books and knowledge, once that brain's turned on, the possibilities of what it can come up with and think and succeed and do and accomplish are absolutely limitless. And that's why education is so important. And that's why when we look at the American slave population, they were desperate to deny education to their slaves. They didn't want them to have access to that, because they knew what would happen if they did. So knowledge of the Enlightenment spreads, and I already alluded to this before, but there's this big tension between the Creoles and the Peninsulares. Creoles are highly educated, but they are denied political rights, and they resent the Peninsulares for it, because the Creoles see themselves as equal to the Peninsulares. There is no difference between you and I. We are both European. The only difference between Peninsulares is that you were born in Europe, and I'm a Creole, and I was born in the colony. But we are both European, and we are both better than everybody of mixed ancestry below us, and certainly those of non-mixed ancestry. There's no reason in the minds of the Creoles that they should be denied this right of political rights. So just again, Creoles are not allowed to hold the highest office. As time go by, they resent them. They want the power. The Creoles tend to be extremely wealthy. They're the landowners. They're the silver mine owners. So here we go. Miguel Hidalgo. I'm sorry, the weird sounds. I forget that I take some in and put them out. So he was a highly educated Creole priest assigned to the town of Dolores, Mexico. He will lead a rebellion based on the disagreement in principles between the Creoles and Peninsulares. In September 16th, 1810, So this is after the Haitian Revolution. The rebellion starts. He rings the church bell, and called upon his Mestizo and indigenous parishioners, members of his church, to take up arms against the Spanish. Let's overthrow the Spanish. And he's saying this to the lower classes of, let's join us Creoles, join us and we will overthrow the Spanish. Now, when you say that, if you are a Mestizo or an indigenous parishioner, you're thinking, awesome, we're going to overthrow the Spanish and we're going to get some equality over here, like they did in the French Revolution. That's not always the case. Not always what the Creoles had in mind. So he leads this kind of ragtag army made up all the way toward Mexico City, and they slaughter any Peninsularo they can come across in their path. They never made it to the capital. He is captured and shot in 1811. He is considered, though, the father of the Mexican independence movement, and that's what you want to know of his influence. So he's considered the father of the Mexican independence movement. Because remember, like Toussaint Louverture said in the Haitian Revolution and alluded to, you can kill a person, that doesn't mean you kill the idea. There's this theory a lot of times that if you kill the leader of the movement dies, right? You cut the snake off at its head, it's over. What these revolutions are showing is that you could kill the leader. And the revolution may take a while to kind of get their organization back again, but you're not going to kill those ideas. Once those seeds are sown, once people believe that they can continue, they're going to. Because once people have freedom in their grasp, they are not going to let it go, and they're not going to give up on it. All right. So Jose Morelos, he takes over. Now, he's a Mestizo. So that means he has one parent that is of European ancestry and one parent that is of indigenous population ancestry. He takes over for Hidalgo, and he is much more successful general. And so much so that Napoleon Bonaparte even recognizes the capabilities of Jose Morelos, and it's like, this dude is the bomb.com. I'd like to have him on my side because we could take over the world. And then, of course, Napoleon being Napoleon would just plan to turn on him. But, anyway. So he establishes a Congress which created a Declaration of Rights. And you want to notice, with all these revolutions, one of the first things that they do is they create some sort of Declaration of Rights. So the Americans have the Declaration of Independence. We have our Constitution. We have the Bill of Rights. This French have their Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. They have the French Constitution. Then you add the Napoleonic Code on top of that. In the Haitian Revolution, they get rid of slavery. They extend the French ideas, and here they create a Declaration of Rights, they abolish slavery, and they have the idea of equality. So those ideas of equality, liberty, and democracy that were the cornerstones of the French Revolution, they spread. That kind of idea continues. So these are all revolutions to include those things. He is captured, however, and executed in December of 1850. All right. The movement doesn't start there, stop there, doesn't end. So you have Augustin de Iturbide, or Iturbide, excuse my horrific Spanish. So in 1821, while Spain is busy dealing with domestic issues, so they're having all sorts of kerfuffle post the downfall of Napoleon and trying to reset things up in Spain. They don't really have time to notice that when they killed Morelos, that they didn't kill the Mexican independence movement. That's still kind of going on. And so he's a Creole, and he's a colonel, and he gets the support of the Mexican army, and he launches an effort to free Mexico City. By the time Spain realizes that and gets word that things are happening, because remember, there's a big delay in communication because of the time with which to get information from one place to another, Mexico had declared independence, and they had made Augustine their emperor. And Mexico's like, what? That's not what we had in mind. We thought y'all were kind of done with that once we killed your previous leader, Morales, and the Mexican independence. The Creoles and the Mestizos are like, yep, no, we were still going on with that. So General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna led the opposition forces, and he throws out Augustine, but in 1824, Mexico is still made a republic. Pay attention to Santa Anna. Things are going to happen with him in a minute. So the Mexican Constitution guarantees basic civil rights, but it doesn't deal with a lot of major issues. It doesn't deal with land distribution. It didn't deal with poverty. It didn't deal with the status of the indigenous population, and it didn't give equal education to everyone. So even though Mexico declares itself a republic and they're setting up some things, and they had set up a system that was the Declaration of Rights, when they wrote their constitution, it really leaves out a bunch of major issues, and that's going to cause some problems. So post the Mexico being created a republic, which Spain's not entirely happy with, so kind of hold on that. If you're a liberal, you wanted more reforms. They're heavily influenced by the French and the American revolutions. They wanted to use that as a role model for the church. They wanted to use their constitutions as a role model for the Mexican government and the Mexican Constitution. So they want the Constitution redone to address those issues and make the issues up here much more equitable to, between all people living in Mexico and not just Creoles. They also want to strongly limit the power of the Roman Catholic Church, which was very heavy in Mexico because of their connection with Spain. And they believed that the Roman Catholic Church would undermine efforts to create democracy within Mexico. If you were a conservative, you really wanted to centralize power and you wanted to give a lot more power to the church. You were also probably a very wealthy Creole. So, problems with the U.S. In the 1830s and the 1840s, Santa Anna leads Mexico as a dictator, and because remember he threw out the other guy, Augustine, and not everybody's really happy with that. Most people really aren't happy with dictators. Doesn't go over well. Americans had been slowly but surely inching their way into land that was owned by Mexico, and we're referring to what today we know as the state of Texas that was actually owned by Mexico. And Americans were trying to spread not only slavery there, but also cotton plantations. But see, Mexico had outlawed slavery as a country, and they didn't want slavery in Texas because Texas is part of Mexico. It was just known as Mexico then. It wasn't Texas or anything. And so eventually the Santa Anna gets really mad at the Americans, and the Americans living in Texas decide they don't want to be part of Mexico anymore. They want Texas to be an independent country, and so they rebel. This is, if you've ever heard, remember the Alamo, that sort of stuff. And Texas gets its independence in 1836. And Mexico tells the U.S., you better not think about trying to make Texas part of America, because if you do, buddy, we're going to have some problems. But Texas kind of wants to become a state, but then the U.S. is like, oh, I don't know if we can have another slave state because we got issues with slavery. And we'll get into this really heavy in American history, but to sort of make things simple, Texas does become an American state, becomes the 28th state, and Mexico gets mad. And then there are a whole bunch of other issues. The American president, James K. Polk, goes to Mexico and was like, hey, will you sell us what is known as California? Because Mexico owned, if you're looking at a U.S. map, Mexico owned from basically all the western part of the U.S. The U.S. territory really kind of stopped at around the Texas border, and the U.S. wanted California, and Mexico wouldn't sell it to us, and we're like, oh, we're not okay with that. So anyway, it leads to, and that's some other issues dealing with border issues and that kind of thing, lead to the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. In the end, the America is successful. Mexico loses all their western lands, and they also lose California. We set the border of the Rio Grande, the river, as the border. And then from then on, the U.S. and Mexico basically get along. We don't have a lot of border issues, and I kind of hesitate on saying that because I'm thinking of current politics. But as in, we don't have wars with each other. We pretty much are like, you do you, that kind of thing, right? So In case you're wondering, Santa Anna, prior to the Mexican-American War, he gets overthrown and they exile him to Cuba, and then he comes back in the Spanish-American War, but then he gets killed. So, all right. So Benito Juarez, he is an Indian lawyer, and I mean by Indian, I mean a Native American. He has a very poor background, but he ends up becoming the leader of Mexico. He serves 5 terms, and he really breaks that pattern of military leadership and Creole rule because you have someone that isn't. The liberals call for a vote called La Reforma, and that results in the new constitution that they had wanted before that addresses the issue of education and land and voting rights and that sort of thing. It also limits the power of the Catholic Church and the army, and it's their attempt at creating something close to resembling democracy. So, but don't count Europe out. So in 1862, Napoleon III of France invades, because why the heck not? And he backs a conservative civil war against Juarez's reforms because a lot of the very rich Creoles and the Peninsulares don't like Juarez because he's not really benefiting them. And Napoleon III claims that his reason for invasion was that Mexico had owed French citizens living in Mexico money, and they had not paid that back. And Napoleon III is like, hey, if you owe a bunch of French citizens money, Mexican government, you got to pay them. And so the French French army forces Juarez out. They get rid of the Constitution, and they put Austrian Archduke Maximilian as emperor of Mexico. And the Mexican people are like, what the French toast is going on here? We're not okay with that. And really, people don't like foreign people ruling them. So Juarez comes back. He drops out the French army in 1867. The U.S. steps in. They help out Mexico. Why? Because we don't want France over here. That's really why. We're not doing it because we're good people. I mean, we are good people, but we're doing it because we don't want France over here. We don't need France over here doing our stuff. Now, if you look at the date, this is right post Civil War, so the U.S. kind of has had our own issues going on, but Maximilian is captured. He's shot. And you're not supposed to, according to the Mexican Constitution, you're not supposed to serve more than 2 terms, but Juarez is reelected numerous times until his death in 1872. They like him. He's good folk. All right. So other leaders in South America, what are they inspired by? The Haitian Revolution, the Mexican Revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, independence movements going on all over the place, and we see some other people come out. Simon Bolivar, or Bolivar, whatever makes you happy, he's considered the most influential leader in the South American independence movement. He's known as the Liberator. He is from what is today Venezuela. He's born to a Creole family, so that means he's born here. That means they're wealthy, but they're not Peninsulares, and they don't like the Peninsulares. He traveled back and forth to Europe often, and while he was there, he's getting a lot of the ideas that are going on in Europe. He really liked Napoleon's leadership, and he agreed with a lot of what Napoleon was doing. And so he's like, you know what, I'm going to go back to South America and I'm going to set my people free. So in 1811, Venezuela declares independence from Spain, who is otherwise kind of busy, because if we go back and look, that's when they were having some internal issues. That's why they don't notice, things going on in Mexico. And so he leads a series of military campaigns against the Spanish for 10 years. But he eventually defeats the Spanish in 1821. So in the periods from basically the early 1800s to, well, let's take that, the early 1800s on up, Spain's got a real problem of continuing to lose colonial power after colonial power after colonial power. And they're losing these colonial powers, and they have issues with them, and at the same time, they're having internal issues. So they just got some problems. So what Bolivar wanted to do was he wanted to form what he called the Federation of the Andes, and it was going to include a lot of the areas in South America that are now independent countries. He was going to include them in one big group, but that doesn't happen. He ends up setting up what's known as Gran Colombia, and that includes what is today the countries of Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. And then other leaders set up separate countries, Peru, Bolivia, etc. And then he's like, oh, this is really difficult. It's really hard to govern. Things aren't working well. And he decides that maybe that's not the best idea. And eventually, what was Gran Colombia, Venezuela is going to break off and be its own country, and all these other ones are going to be their own countries with their own rulers, because it was more easy to govern. Jose de San Martin, he fought for independence from Spain in the south. So in the northern area, you've got Simon Bolivar, and in the south you have Jose de San Martin. He was born in Argentina. When he then goes to Spain, he comes back. He goes to Spain and then he comes back because he was in Spain fighting against Napoleon. And when he comes home, he's like, oh my gosh, area of Argentina, they are rising up against Spanish rule. That sounds pretty cool. I'll work on that, even though I just tried to help Spain keep out Napoleon, but whatevs. And so that led to the independence movement within Argentina and most of the southern parts of South America. In 1816, he declared independence for Argentina. Then he moves on to what we know as Chile. He leads troops over a 15,000-foot summit in the Andes. He surprises the Spanish troops, and they're like, oh, what? So he wins that battle. So then Chile becomes independent. And then in Gran Colombia, after Chile, he moves on to Gran Colombia. He and Simon Bolivar meet, and we don't know what they discussed. We don't know what they said. We don't know what they did. We just know that they meet. And as a result of the meeting, San Martin leaves and goes to Europe and leaves Bolivar in power. So not sure. We don't know, and we can speculate all day. But the result is that San Martin leaves and goes back to Europe, and Bolivar is left in power. All right, let's talk about the Portuguese. We're almost done. Thanks for bearing with me. I know this is a long one. Napoleon invades Portugal in 1807. The reigning king, John VI, leaves and he goes to Brazil because, he doesn't want what's going to happen. He didn't want to die. And so when he gets there, they basically move the entire Portuguese government over to Brazil, which makes Brazil go way up in importance because it's functioning as both Brazil and Portugal. So it becomes cool. But the Brazilians are not immune to all the revolutions going on around them and in Latin and South America. And they're like, you know what? We really want to be independent too because everybody else is being independent, and that would be pretty gosh darn cool. Prince Pedro I, he's the son of John VI, and he's now in power. And what's really cool is the Brazilian people are like, hey, Prince Pedro, we don't want to be under the rule of Portugal anymore. And he's like, you know what? Whatevs. Okay, you don't have to. This is important because the Brazilian Revolution is the only revolution in that area that is done without any bloodshed. They're granted independence, which is kind of unheard of. So you've got to give props to Prince Pedro I, who really didn't have an option. If it had gone to bloodshed, he knew what would have happened. It continued to happen all over the place. So rather than get embroiled with that and deal with that, he really wanted to deal with the European issues, and so he just let them go. So in all the Latin American revolutions, and again, Latin America for our purposes, we're looking at Mexico, we're looking at the lands that connects Mexico to Colombia. We'll talk about them more later. And then we're looking at South America and, of course, the Caribbean islands. So that whole area we're kind of looking at as the Latin American revolutions. So the Latin American elites knew they needed support of the people, but they did not want a slave revolt like Haiti. They didn't want what happened in Haiti to happen to them. And so the answer is what's known as nativism. And we're going to practice the way that we're doing the definition of nativism here. We're going to see it differently other places. And they grouped all those born in the Americas, the Creoles, Native Americans, free black people, mestizos, as Americanos. The enemy, the people we don't like, are those people born in Spain and Portugal. Those are the bad people. People of color are enticed with promises of freedom, social advancement, and the end of legal restrictions. So why would you support what really is most of the time Creole revolutions? Well, because they're told they're going to get all these things. But in actuality, that doesn't ever happen the way that they're told, they being people of color are told it's going to happen. And that will lead to some problems later on as well. So the Spanish colonies did not unite like in North America. So like you had Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and the what had been the colonies united to become the United States. The Spanish colonies don't do that. There's no United States of Latin America. Well, why? There's sharp class division along lines of race. There are divisions along class. The ideology still remains. And that there's just a lot of disagreement about the social stratification, who ranks where, why, and how. There's a lot of geographic obstacles, Andes Mountains, oceans, that kind of thing, that prevents effective communication. And then you have that there is a strong, deep-rooted attachment to regional identities. They're not as they don't necessarily want to form one country. They are very proud and want to stick with their regional identities. So problems after independence. The geography of Central and South America made transportation and communication difficult. So that stalls a lot of trade and economic growth. The Spanish and the Portuguese rule what's left of their Latin American and they really don't have a clue on how to run their own governments peacefully and democratically. It doesn't work out necessarily the way that they think that it would. Independence doesn't bring about changes in social conditions, so there's still social issues. So yes, they're free from Spanish control, but they continue to have economic problems, government problems, race, ethnicity problems. Those aren't going away, and a lot of those issues a lot of those issues are what's going to stall the development of those areas. The following slides are looking at similarities and differences between the revolutions themselves. I'm not going to lecture on those. Sorry. It's really loud. I'm not going to lecture on those, but you do need to read them and you do need to know them. Those are great information for a short answer question, for an essay question. I'll make sure you read the slides dealing with similarities and differences between the different revolutions. And then I've just got a chart here looking at the Haitian, Mexican, and Brazilian independence movement, kind of comparing those. So thanks for hanging on what's been a really long Edpuzzle. That's one of the longest ones I've ever done. I think it is the longest one I've ever done. But hey, we're going to do some art stuff in class, so you'll be cool. That's all for today.